Well, the segue could either be a great transition to what's hopeful, or we could just stay there, kind of in the sixth stage of the aftermath of, since I haven't talked to you since, of the aftermath of Georgia. So we'll keep it brief. What's meaningful from that game? How much of it was Georgia? How much of it was Oregon? Because of course everyone's throwing around the term trash and dumpster fire concerning Oregon, and I tend to think it's still a pretty talented and capable football team.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to make any sort of assessments on Oregon at this moment. They've played two teams, both were absolute ass kickings. One, Oregon received, on the receiving end against, I think, the best team in the country. And frankly, I've kind of been thinking aloud a couple times on our podcast at Odds and Audibles on Duck Territory, and kind of written it. Might be maybe the best team Oregon's played ever, at least since I've been around. That was a very complete performance from Georgia, and we'll see what happens with Georgia in the SEC this year. Maybe they won't be quite as dominant, but man, that team just had everything clicking, and there wasn't much Oregon could do. And then Oregon goes against Eastern Washington, who is one of the better FCS programs out there, and they win 70-14, and it kind of everything clicks for them. So I don't know really what to make of this Oregon team. We're going to learn a lot of answers this week against BYU. I'm trying to stay pretty optimistic because I think we'll get some of the matchups later on in the show, but I think there are some matchups that might favor Oregon that they can kind of pick on and win some battles. And there's also some spots where I just kind of don't really know, because the competition has either been the best or very much below them, and kind of trying to determine what this team is really hard right now. But I think from the Georgia game, a couple of things stand out as to kind of like the whys behind it. I think a big part is Dan Lanning's first game as head coach against a really, really good team. I didn't see a coach who really was, I don't want to say he was ill prepared, but I didn't see a coach making a lot of adjustments either. And I thought Georgia sort of found a weakness in Oregon and just kind of kept going to it. And I didn't see Oregon really adjust. I found that to be pretty concerning. I was also, I think probably, like, it's hard to really measure improvements, but Eastern Washington should try to do a lot of the same sort of stuff in terms of throwing it to the perimeter, shallow pass, screen game stuff. And Oregon's defense responded much, much better. So I think that part stands out as kind of the Dan Lanning part. First game as a head coach, was he kind of lost in the moment of going against a former place where he had just coached against an incredibly talented team? And will that get better? You hope it will. And Dan has kind of talked about some of that stuff behind the scenes of, hey, we it was the players that performed very well, but we didn't perform very well. They got outcoached and they got outplayed. So we'll see against BYU this week. This is kind of their next big test. And I think the other thing for me was just the Bo Nix factor. And, this is a guy who, you look at his numbers historically against good teams and hasn't been very good. And it showed up again, down in Atlanta. And I actually think you go back and watch the game, he wasn't as bad as people probably think. I think there were some nice moments there. But unfortunately, on the biggest plays of the game, he just throws the ball to the other team and doesn't give his offense really much of a chance. I don't think either of those plays are really acceptable decisions. So that's a veteran quarterback who should know better, who didn't. He bounced back well against Eastern Washington, but I came away thinking those were two big components of this. Georgia was more talented, faster, better. They outcoached him, and then the quarterback play just wasn't good enough. And we'll see this week against BYU how much that kind of stuff matters and kind of where things are at. I think it's really hard to know with this team right now.
Yeah, when you throw out those three components, if the other team's bigger, stronger, faster, and then your quarterback makes bad decisions and your head coach fails to adjust and is ill-prepared in comparison to the other coaching, right, that's a formula for disaster, of course. For as much as it's difficult for you, and certainly if it's going to be difficult for you, it's going to be difficult for me, because I didn't see the Eastern Washington game. I watched the Georgia game until it got out of hand. Difficult for you to make anything out of that. Then it's going to be difficult for anyone to make anything out of that, except for one thing I would have to say. When you, regardless of those two teams being on opposite ends of the spectrum, maybe the best team in the country and an FCS team, I think it's safe to say that the Ducks didn't hang their heads. They didn't mope around, and there's no way you can beat anybody by 8 touchdowns if you didn't come out and have the right response for the butt kicking you just took.
Yeah, I think that was pretty encouraging because, like I said a moment ago, I think the players and the coaches they really took ownership for not playing a very good game. And not, like I said, I think Dan even said a couple of times, like, we didn't have the answers, we didn't have the counters against Georgia. And but like I said a moment ago, I think Eastern Washington tried to go to a lot of the stuff that Georgia succeeded with, and they couldn't succeed against this Oregon defense. And again, the athletes, such a different level. But just in terms of like proving that you could execute a game plan at a high level and win a football game decisively, I think that was really important. I think if this was a game where Oregon wins by 3, even 4 scores, you come away with probably some pretty large concerns. But the fact that you're able to go out there and score touchdowns on each of your first 9 drives, the fact that your defense held Eastern Washington without a first down for its first four, and forced 2 turnovers and got after the quarterback and kind of did some things that you didn't see the first game. I think all that was really encouraging. But how much of that is fool's gold? And I think we'll have a much better idea of that in about a couple of days here.
Yeah, so we've got a little bit of optimism that the Georgia game did not derail the season emotionally, but again, we need to see more, and this is certainly a good opponent to measure it against. Probably not the best, but a top 30 team in the country, something in that range.